I feel like it definitely did need to be there because Mozilla, they really don't understand how to communicate with the audience they have at this point, because Firefox does still have a lot of, like, my dad uses Firefox. Like, they have these legacy holdover users who don't even care about Google or anything like that. He is a Firefox user on macOS. So he's just using Firefox because that's what he's always used. But the core Firefox user base at this point is that very privacy-oriented. Those people who are using Firefox specifically to be away from what Google is doing, specifically because they care about privacy and security and all of these nice things. And Mozilla does not understand how to talk to these people in a way that gets their point across in the way that they intend it to.
I'll even argue that they're not even trying. I haven't seen them communicate at all in a way that is aimed towards users. It's mostly aimed towards their change logs or anything like that. It's very hard to get a good amount of communication from Mozilla lately. I personally feel, as a user, you hear about things in the change logs. It's been the same thing with their whole AI thing that they've released right before that, where it was, I think it was for alt text.
The alt text one, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
because they've done a couple of things related to AI.
See, I haven't even been following, to be completely honest. But that's just it shows Mozilla just doesn't bother to communicate with its users. And it's a bit sad because they're losing market share at this point, and we're all at risk of having one big vendor in charge of pretty much the whole web. And that historically was like that, and it didn't turn out well. And I'm hoping we're not going back to those days.
Yeah, I was getting involved in, like, I first started using a computer towards, like, the tail end of IE's dominance. So, like, around IE 6, IE 7, just before, like, Chrome was really beginning to take off. But looking back now at, especially, like, the web development space, where if you wanted to build a website, you had to design it around IE. Because yes, these standards bodies that exist today did exist back then. But if you're the only entity that exists in that space, you control the standards body. Like, they have to listen to what you're doing, because who's going to stop you? Like, you are the web browser. You can do whatever you want. And Google hasn't gone that route yet, because Safari is still at least enough of a barrier against it happening. But when you have only two competitors, it's very easy to create a duopoly then and have them just agree on things, and then everyone else, you just have to follow along. Luckily, they have a fairly combative relationship, so you don't have as much there, but there's certainly going to be a lot of things that they will fundamentally agree on that are not going to be good for the average user.
Yeah, I agree. And you were talking about Internet Explorer at some point, right before, and the IE problem stayed around for a long time. Any business-to-business application like people were developing, even until like Windows 10 came out, had to target Internet Explorer 11.
Edge had an IE, IE compatibility mode, where it would run specifically like IE, I think ran like IE 7 or something. Because, there were government sites like that, and there were sites that said they worked better in Chrome, but Chrome was never to that point where, at least so far, very well could at some point in the future, never got to the point where websites basically only worked on Chrome, whereas IE, because it was so different, there legitimately were things where you could not use the site.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because a lot of websites were built on ActiveX. Ugh. Shudders. Yeah, that was not a good time.
I'm very happy I managed to skip all that. For now. Yeah, for now, at least.
It wasn't good. Well, hopefully it's not coming back, and Flash is also dead, so that's pretty good. Yeah. There was a small period where Chrome was essentially the only one who was actually properly implementing WebGL, but it lasted like for 2 months. So,
well, that's more of a problem of the others were just moving slower as opposed to doing things your own way and breaking everything. Who really cares?
Yeah, absolutely. That was Google moving fast, and it was a standard, so it was just a question of time until the other browsers caught up. So it wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
And this whole problem of, like, people in the web space will talk about, like, web frameworks and all this stuff, but the reason why these existed in the first place is because no one wanted to deal with web browsers. They wanted to build an application in JavaScript, and they knew how JavaScript worked. The problem is all of these different engines had their own weird, subtle bugs, and these HTML rendering, the HTML rendering was all slightly different between these different browsers. So you needed some way to basically just simplify it to the developer so they didn't really have to think about those problems. That's how you got things like jQuery. That's the reason why things are still stuck around today. Obviously, they're still useful for in building a complex graphical application we now see on the web, but their origin is because the web just used to really, really suck.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you also had, that's why Sass started coming up as well in the front-end development space, is you could compile, and then what was the library? It's still being used today, auto-prefixer, where it would automatically auto-prefix all the little properties between different browser vendors. It's less of a thing nowadays, and that's pretty nice. We're finally getting to a place where, yes, you have different browser engines, but they're mostly following standard now.
Yeah.
So web development today is a good time to be doing web development.
Well, it's also made easier because there's not really that many browser engines in the first place. Because we do have. What does Mozilla call their engine nowadays?
Oh, good question. Is it still Gecko?
I think it's
Gecko.
Gecko.
They want to switch to Servo at some point. Yeah, they want to switch to Servo.
Servo's the other thing. Servo's the Rust thing. I think they're calling.
Yeah.
I think because they temporarily renamed it to Quantum, but then I think they rebranded back. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think Quantum was their rewrite of their CSS engine and rendering engine within Gecko. I remember seeing it's been a while.
This is why people just say it's a Firefox based browser, because it's just easier to say it like that.
Yeah.
But if you look at the web space, most things are just Chromium. Like, there's so few actual, and when you do look at a lot of the Firefox based browsers, most of them I wouldn't even really call their own browser. Like, Brave is a separate thing from Chromium. Vivaldi is a separate thing. Yes, they still use that same upstream code base. Like, Opera GX is another good example. Like, they use the same upstream code base, but they're clearly distinct pieces of software. But when you look at things like LibreWolf or IceCat or pretty much most that exist in the Firefox world, they're like Firefox with maybe a couple of cherry-pick patches and a custom config. Like, LibreWolf especially, people talk about how great LibreWolf is. LibreWolf is basically just a pre-configured Firefox, which is fine. Like, if that, it's useful to have that, but a lot of people seem to get confused about what it's actually providing.